Hello, everyone, and happy July, and welcome to PDN Live. I'm Shannon, your moderator, and with me, as always, is Rob Pincus. Tonight's topic is live fire practice, brought to you by Springfield Armory. And basically, Rob will be answering all of your questions about targets, drills, realism, or anything else you've been wondering or related to practicing or improving your self-defense shooting skills at the range. We do have a chat box, so if you do have a question that pops up during this live session, just write it down. We'll do the best we can to get around to it. Just please note that the more on topic your question is to tonight's topic of live fire practice, be more likely to answer it. And for those of you that have not signed up for our newsletter yet, you should. It's free. It's awesome. There should be a link down below. So, Rob, it's great to catch up with you. You're heading towards rounding home plate on your tour. You're in my home state. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I can see the guy. He's got the ball, and I have to like smash him over so I can get to the home plate there. I'm really close. I've got 2 days of training starting tomorrow with a law enforcement unit here in the Portland, Oregon area, and I'll be with them on a private range tomorrow and Wednesday, and then I'm training with Mike Hughes and the whole team up at Next Level Training, CERT Pistols, in Northern Washington on Saturday. And that's it. Saturday is the last day for me of the tour. It's the last weekend of the tour nationwide. And we'll be announcing our $7,000 7K giveaway winner that we're doing with most of our tour sponsors this year over the weekend, and wrapping up 106 classes at over 50 locations over about 4.5 months.
That's insane. I feel like over the past couple of years, the tour has really grown. Do you see it? Do you see the tour growing again in 2018 with more locations?
Yeah, I think that next year we're going to be adding even more instructors, and I'm going to be spacing out my training a little bit more. This year, May and June, we're pretty much nonstop, weekday classes, weekend classes, and it's hard to keep up with the travel and still be doing everything else that we do with Personal Defense Network and Avidity Arms and everything else I have going on. Not to mention the little 2-year-old that's going to be going on 3 by the end of the next tour. So probably next year we're actually going to space the tour out a little bit more. So it may last a little bit longer. Again, I would expect more instructors involved in the tour. And certainly now that we're over 100 classes, I don't see us going backwards.
Awesome. And in the off season, actually, this could probably go right into tonight's discussion. In this off season, are there any classes that are going on, or is there any sage words of wisdom to students to take what they've learned on the tour into practice on their home ranges?
Yeah, well, the tour is a little bit of an illusion as far as my training year goes. This is the time of year that I do travel the country in the truck and spend 4 months on the road. Again, a couple of those months are pretty much nonstop, but the training doesn't stop, right? I still have classes. August, I do take most of August off. I'll be at the Polypalooza training event in Ohio, and maybe doing 1 or 2 other things during August. But September is a busy month, and then I'll be over in Europe doing a lot of things in October. And we always run classes, especially down at the home range in Ancient City Range in St. Augustine, Florida. I'll be running classes down there through the winter. We're going to be doing the team-up class with Rob Latham this winter in December. So there's still a lot going on. But one of the important messages at the end of any of the classes, the tour classes or otherwise, is, what do you do next? And a lot of times students will, especially if they're new to training, or if they've kind of fallen into a rut where going to the class is more the focus than actually developing their skill, where they'll talk about, what class do I do next? And sometimes it's easier with the new people to remind them, like, look, you know more now than you did 48 hours ago, like exponentially, right? You just took a 2-day class. You've been flooded with information in your head. You've got the skill sets. You've got the drills. You understand the underlying concepts. Go practice. Don't worry about what class you're going to take next. Go to the range and get some practice done. And that's why this topic is perfect for the end of the tour, because we've just had so many hundreds of students go through so many classes, over a couple thousand students, I'm sure, when you look at all the instructors that have been busy over the last few months. And you extend that to all the people that have taken training in the Combat Focused Shooting program from other certified instructors, or the entry-level courses from our defensive firearms coaches. And of course, now the affiliation with USCCA and their 1,500 instructors across the country. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people that have just taken classes that have a lot to practice. They have a lot to work on. And that's what the live fire training time should be about. It's not all about going to classes and collecting certificates. It's really about developing your skills. So once you've taken a good fundamental class, taking the next class should be the last thing you're worried about, particularly the last shooting class, right? Go take a medical class or take an unarmed class or take a legal class from a guy like Andrew Bronca or Masad Ayub. But mostly you just need to go practice.
Okay. So we'll just kick it off. We already have live questions coming in. David asks, what's your best advice or tool to simulate a man-sized target coming towards you?
So there aren't a lot of really elegant or efficient ways to do that if you don't have a range with charging targets, right? A range with carriers that are designed, or a rail system of some kind designed to push the target towards you. The fact is that it's probably not incredibly important. If you understand the idea that once your eyes are fixed on a threat, your hands are going to move the gun to your eye line. Your eye line is going to stay fixed on the threat, and especially in close quarters, you know, at 9 to 15 foot range, just outside of 2 arms reach, you're not going to need your sights 9 times out of 10 to get good, solid body shots. So your eyes stay aligned on the target. Your gun stays aligned with your eyes because of your practice, repetitive motion of the gun to your line of sight and keeping it in your line of sight. So whether the target's moving a little bit or not, left or right, or certainly towards you or away from you, doesn't really matter. The human body can only move so fast. So someone charging at you, once you have your gun out and extended on that target, the target may be charging at you, but in the time frame it takes you to fire 3, 4, 5, 6 shots at that distance of just outside of 2 arms reach, the target's not going to cover very much territory. People make a big deal about how far or how fast someone can move in terms of reaching you with a knife or another contact threat when you're caught off guard, or when your gun is still in your holster or concealed, things like that. But if we're talking about the actual shooting part, once your gun's on the target, the difference of that target being 9 feet away or 12 feet away or 10 feet away or 6 feet away really doesn't make that much difference. So while there isn't an elegant way to practice that, there also may not be as much of a need to practice that as one might think initially.
Okay, so let's go, you kind of touch base on going to your home range. So say your home range is a little more strict on the rules. For example, if you're shooting a long gun, you have to be at a bench or in a bench position, nothing too crazy, nothing on the ground, nothing moving. Or if you're doing handguns, you're limited to your lane. They don't want you holstering. Just more strict ranges. What's your advice to students to train, to be able to train for personal defense scenarios when they're so limited at their own home range?
Get a new home range. That's the number one thing, right? We get this question a lot, get this comment a lot. I tell people at the end of every class, like, I'd much rather you drive an hour for 15 minutes of practice than drive 15 minutes for an hour of target shooting and not get any defensive shooting practice, especially when you're working on developing core skills and you haven't really gotten a lot of practice. You know, there's really nothing practical that you can do with a rifle sitting at a bench that has anything to do with defensive shooting. You know, there's just nothing. Like making sure your guns, your red dots is, you know, zeroed or something like that. Even adjusting your stock and things like that, you're going to be in a different shooting position sitting down at a table rested than you are standing up in your bedroom or in a hallway or at a stairwell. So when it comes to, like, there's so little overlap that you're better off just not doing it. Sit at home on your couch and visualize yourself doing it right from one of the classes you've taken. Sometimes people have a hard time with that. They can't get away from the idea that somehow going to the range and shooting is better than not shooting in every case. And that's just not true. If anything, you're untraining the good, valuable stuff at an extreme. So at the extreme of you have to sit at a bench to fire your home defense rifle, other than checking reliability, there's really no reason to do that. Go find someplace else to do it. Or train at home with a dry gun, or maybe with a laser cartridge insert, or something like that, a SIRT insert, SIRT insert for your AR, and find ways to make that valuable. As far as the pistol, there's a lot more that you can do in a traditional, what we call a traditional range. It doesn't allow holster work, things like that. In fact, we did an entire DVD with Andy Loeffler from Blackwing. When he was running the ranges at Blackwing Shooting Center, a 5-star range that was my home range for a while in central Ohio, they didn't allow the average person to come in off the street, or even the average member, to stand on the line and present from the holster. So we did a whole DVD on what you can do that's valuable there. And one of the other things that we addressed in that DVD was how to convince the local range owner or management that it's probably in their best interest to start allowing more dynamic, more realistic practice to be done on their ranges from a financial standpoint, and explaining to them that it can be done in a reasonable and safe way. You know, one of the problems is a lot of these ranges are like, you know, old NRA style, you know, basic pistol shooting type ranges that are being run by guys who may have been in the firearms business and the range operation business long before the explosion of CCW, right? So if you go back 20 years ago, when there really weren't all that many people who were carrying guns in public, and there weren't all that many people who were well trained in presentation from the holster in the private sector, the ranges didn't really have a need, right? There wasn't a lot of demand for people coming in and saying, hey, I want to practice presentation from the holster. And every once in a while, when you did get someone who came in and asked, they didn't have a comfort level, right? And there wasn't a financial incentive because it was only maybe 10% of their members. Well, now, you know, most ranges have a much larger percentage of members and would-be members, potential customers, who have concealed carry permits, who are specifically interested in the defensive use of firearms. And it definitely behooves them to open up. And that's what I'm seeing. As I travel around the country, there are fewer and fewer ranges that don't allow some form, don't have some way to get to where you're allowed to do presentation from the holster. For example, I was just at Reno Guns and Range in Nevada. Great facility, world-class facility, relatively new. They've been open for a couple years. And even someone who just walks in off the street has the opportunity to practice presentation from the holster. As long as they let the range officer, they always have a range officer on each of their bays, and just let that range officer know that you'd like to do it. They're going to watch you do a few reps, and 9 times out of 10, if somebody comes in knowing what they're doing, there's not going to be any issue whatsoever. As long as the holster is safe and their procedures are safe, they're going to be allowed to do it. Other ranges might have a 30-minute class you have to take, or if you show a certificate from a class like a combat focus shooting class, they may say, oh, okay, yeah, sure, you can come in here. And if they don't host a combat focus shooting instructor, maybe they host another instructor group or school in that region that is sort of vetted by the range owner or the range management staff, where they'll let you work from the holster. So, those are the two important things that aren't the easy answers. One, go to a range where you can practice. Two, change the range you have to go to so that you can practice there. Ultimately, if you're really stuck, again, we have some information at personaleventsnetwork.com online on making the best of the worst situation. But if you practice from the ready position and you practice your lateral movement, you may get somebody who taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you're not allowed to shoot and move. Okay, well, I'm not shooting and moving. I'm just moving into my position as I extend the gun. And while that looks dynamic or fast or whatever, if you point to everybody else on the line who puts the gun in their hand and then sets their feet in whatever their shooting position is, it may not look as dynamic or as athletic, but technically they have a gun in their hand and they're moving their feet into a shooting position, or they're moving their body into a shooting position. And that's really all you're doing when you practice your lateral movement offline as you extend the gun, or if you move while you reload, those types of things. So you can practice all that inside of those little bays. It's not as good as being on an open range, but it's better than nothing. And ultimately, if you then go home and with a laser gun, with an inert gun, with put a snap cap in your gun, or otherwise make sure that you aren't putting live ammo into a sterile training environment, a non-live training environment, you then practice your presentation from the holster to the ready position in all kinds of different positions, different clothing, all that in off the range. And then on the range, you're practicing driving the gun out from extension. Your brain can stitch those things together so that as you come out of the holster, you're moving through the ready position, driving out to your shooting position. So you can at least get that out of it. And it's very different for pistols versus rifles.
So let's say that a majority of our viewers have full-time jobs, whether they work grave shift, 9 to 5, they have 1 hour per week at a range where they're allowed to move around and actually have dynamic movement. How can they maximize that 1 hour a week at the range in their training?
We produced a DVD maybe 5-6 years ago called The Best 100 Rounds. And it was if you only had 100 rounds and limited by range access or limited ammunition, whatever it is, what would a regular practice regimen look like? And of course, the asterisk on that, the precursor is you must have learned how to do all those things. So if 5 of those rounds were fired weak-handed, but you had never trained to fire weak-handed, then you have to go learn that before that practice regimen makes any sense. But if you took that DVD and you broke down the drills and you said, okay, of those drills, which ones can I perform at my range? Which ones have I been trained to do? Which ones am I trying to get better at? And you pull out, okay, well, I'm going to work on one-handed shooting, or I'm going to work on my slide lock reloads, or I'm going to work on malfunction response this week. I think that's what people have to remember, is that there is no magic, this 100 rounds is perfect for everyone all the time. Because, you know, one of the three questions that we challenge students to be able to ask at the end of a class: what are you good at? You know, what are you confident in being able to do from this class? What should you be better at? And that's different from what could you be better at, right? We all could be better at, you know, practically anything if we put more time, effort, and energy into it. But where do we really need to focus? Where should we focus our resources on getting better? And then how do you get better at it? So each individual needs to take that list of core fundamental defensive shooting skills, figure out what they need to work on the most through either, you know, coaching, their own experience, or maybe an evaluation type drill, like a figure-8 drill or something like that, where their weaknesses are exposed, right? And the things that they should be better at become very clear to them. And then that's what they need to work on during that hour. So it's not a fixed, you know, always do this drill. And a lot of people do that, unfortunately. They just show up at the range and they say, I always start off with this drill, or I always do this, or I always do that. And those drills may or may not be actually helping them with anything other than getting good at that drill. So that's a really subjective issue.
So you talked about introducing realistic practice. How do you start to introduce something like shooting offhand, or like if you've never done it before and you're by yourself at the range? Are there places where you can go for resources on specific drills to do? How do you prep yourself for introducing something new to your training?
Obviously, I'm going to advocate for going to a coach, going to an instructor who can coach you through anything that's new. You know, even if that's just the local guy at the range that you know has some idea how to do it. Now, preferably you're going to a certified instructor who's focused on teaching you what you can do and coaching you to go through your process with your gun, your fundamentals, in your context, and not just you know, somebody showing you how they do it and then you trying to emulate it. Because that's what I see a lot at the ranges, or even online. It's just somebody who does something really well saying, here's how I do it, without any regard for teaching that other person, right? It's a big difference between demonstrating and teaching. So once you can identify that teacher who can help you understand how you can achieve a goal, that process will probably come with a practice model sort of built in, right? Again, what do you need to do? What should you be better at doing, and then how do you do it? So that last question is the methodology. So when you go to the range, my biggest thing is that things have to be contextually appropriate. And that's how we define reality-based training. A lot of people sort of still have this idea that reality-based training means it's force on force, or there's role players, or you're shooting marking cartridges at each other. Reality-based simply means it is contextually appropriate for the student, right? It's based on your reality. That could be live fire, it could be contextual, like curriculum based, right? What is the content of the curriculum? But that context is dictated by your gun and the nature of how you're going to use any specific skill set. So if you talk about offhand shooting, right? Weak-handed shooting. For me to do my weak-handed shooting by taking my gun out of my strong hand, putting it into my weak hand, shooting, when I hit slide lock, putting it back into my strong hand, doing a reload, putting the gun back into my weak hand and shooting. Technically, am I practicing weak-handed shooting? Sure, in the middle of that somewhere, I'm practicing weak-handed shooting. But contextually, it's completely ridiculous, right? There's never going to be a time when I'm going to take a gun from my strong hand, put it into my weak hand, shoot. And if I need to be shooting with my weak hand, I can't assume that when I hit slide lock, magically this hand's available again. I'm going to reload and then go back to the weak hand. And I see people do that all the time. So contextually inappropriate training, it's better than nothing in some ways, but probably what you're getting is an overconfidence. So you'd be much better served by taking that gun and putting it down on the table in front of you and having to pick it up with your weak hand, as if, you know, you were at a restaurant, you drew your gun, you drove out to shoot, and you were injured, the gun dropped on the table, you had to reach down with your weak hand, pick it up from the table with your weak hand, then drive out and continue the fight. that makes more sense. And when you hit slide lock, if you don't have a solution for one-handed, weak-handed reloads, if you've never been trained to do that, if you haven't learned how to do that, then you go administrative. Okay, well, I've shot to slide lock. Now I'd have to do something else. Throw the gun at the guy. You're probably not going to throw the gun down range, but you could visualize that, right? Put it down, pick up a knife, right? Whatever it is you're going to do, you're not going to magically get this hand back, right? So there's your, what should I be better at? Well, I should, if I don't know how to reload my gun weak-handed and I've sort of covered the basics, that's something I need to go learn how to do. And that will come with a training methodology for, download your magazines. One has 20%, one has 60%, one has 40%, scramble them up. And that way you don't know if you're going to get 3 shots, 5 shots, 12 shots before you hit slide lock. When you hit slide lock, go through your weak-handed reload procedure, which again, if you're on an indoor range and you can't holster, you're probably not going to be able to do any realistic weak-handed reloads, but you find a place where you can do that. And as you try to expand the things that you're practicing and that you're prepared for, you're going to have to find more and more liberal ranges, right? Ranges that are going to let you do more and more things.
So most ranges have some sort of gun rental facility there where you can try different handguns or shoot different firearms. So say that you're in the market for handgun shopping and going to a range and being able to shoot it before you buy, it's a really good option. And say you shoot a Glock and a Springfield and they both felt good. What are some pointers for testing and shopping for a firearm at the range where you're able to fire it?
Fit is the first thing. You should be able to tell long before you even load the gun whether or not a gun is a viable option for defense. Handgun fit is something that people have put out information on, for years. I think fundamentally one of the most important things that people need to understand is that when you put your hand on the gun, you should be able to run all the controls of that gun without having to compromise your grip very much at all with your strong hand. So if you start off with a gun that you have to use your weak hand to push the magazine release, or that you have to take your hand, way off the gun to manipulate the safety or the decocker, a left-handed person looking at a SIG, P226, just stop looking at it, because there's no way to run that gun efficiently as a left-handed person because of where the decocker is and where the slide stop is. And it's just, you have to move your thumb over or use your weak-hand thumb or something, which is your right-hand thumb. It just doesn't work, right? Guns that have very small safeties set way back against the, like a subcompact gun where the safety is set way back against the hand. I'm thinking like the first generation of the Smith & Wesson Shield had a very small safety, very hard to manipulate, way back against the thumb, and there just really wasn't an efficient way to utilize that safety, especially coming out of the holster driving out to shoot. So if your hand can't manipulate the buttons and levers well, just put it to the side. It's a target shooting gun. I don't care how it's being advertised or who else carries it. It may not work for you. I think of like the Glocks. I mean, I've shot semi-automatic Glocks probably more than any other handgun over the last 20-something years, and carried them for a long time. But I was never able to hit the magazine release efficiently without changing my grip on the gun. So I might have to shift my grip a little bit, but I didn't have to completely let go of the gun, turn it sideways, and I certainly didn't have to use my weak hand. But by putting an extended magazine release on it, I was generally able to hit that magazine release without much of a problem. So that might be an answer, right? So now you're looking for a gun, it needs to fit. You can't hit all the buttons, and magazine release is a very common one for people that don't have long thumbs, long fingers in general. Maybe an oversized magazine release will solve the problem, and that'll open up a whole world of 3 or 4 or 5 different guns that you never could have looked at as viable defensive options before. Other than that, the biggest key to fit is that the first knuckle of your strong hand needs to be on the weak side of the gun. It can't be behind the gun. It can't be under the beaver tail. It's for recoil management, for alignment. You need to be able to make sure that you can get your hand all the way around that gun. That'll get the gun aligned with your wrist better. And that knuckle also gives you then the articulation of this thumb to hit the magazine release and to move around any other levers or buttons you might need to move around. Obviously, while you're still able to actuate the trigger well. So that to me is the biggest thing is before you even leave the gun counter, doesn't matter how popular the gun is, doesn't matter who's recommending the gun, make sure that the gun is within that range that fits your hand. Because the worst thing is you compromise that at the counter. You go into the range. You want to like it. You either because somebody else recommended it or the price was right or who knows what. You get out on the range. You start making compromises. You start rationalizing problems. Maybe you shoot it well in an isolated environment, and then you overlook all those obvious shortcomings that you never even should have been on the range challenging. You just accept them. There's plenty of guns on the market. Find one that actually fits you.
So say you found one at the range that fits you, you're ready to go out and shoot it, and stationary shooting, comfortable. What type of basic drills can you run through that potential firearm to help kind of, say you got to like down to 2 firearms that you really like. What are some drills that you can do to see which one prevails for you?
Again, we got to look at contextually appropriate practice, right? When do we want this gun to perform? Under what circumstances, as a defensive gun, are we going to need to use it? So we look at 9 to 15 feet, multiple round strings of fire on a high center chest, wide open hand, size target, oval, circle, rectangle, whatever, square. That target at 9 to 15 feet, can you put multiple rounds into that target? Especially at that closer end at 9, 10, 11, 12 feet with both eyes open, does the gun align naturally enough for you to keep your eyes focused on the target, press the trigger relatively smoothly, and get those shots into the high center chest? If it doesn't, maybe make some adjustments on your grip, try to figure out why, is it your trigger press? But I wouldn't go too far down the line. If a gun just doesn't fit your hand well or it doesn't point well, then there's no real point in continuing that investigation. There probably will be guns that you'll be able to find that will fit your hand and will point very well for you. Recoil management is a thing that people worry about. How fast should I be able to shoot the gun? Well, I don't know. Without seeing you standing on the line with the gun, I can't tell you how fast you should be able to shoot. But if you have a good fitting gun, your arms are fully extended, your body weight's forward, your shoulders are engaged, and you're 12 feet away from a chest-sized target, you're not able to shoot, 3 rounds per second, maybe up to 5 rounds per second into that target, there probably is something wrong. It might be the gun, it might be your grip, it might be your trigger press, it could be a lot of things. But that's a reasonable goal, and that's a pretty wide goal, right? It's not 4.1 rounds per second. It's not 0.21 split times or something like that. It's just somewhere between 3 and 5 shots per second is attainable under those conditions if the gun fits your hand. Obviously I recommend 9mm. There's not a lot of reason to go above 9mm. There's not much reason most people should have to drop down below 9mm, given the array of gun sizes and types that people can shoot. So that would be the first thing is, multiple round strings of fire, 9 to 15 feet into the high center chest. And then you also, of course, want to work on your sighted fire. And that's where you're really going to pay more attention to your trigger press. Trigger press is essentially the same. It's just you're not paying much attention to it when you're firing rapidly. And when you slow down, you're gonna slow that same exact constant pressure. But instead of being fast constant pressure, it's going to be slow constant pressure. You're going to feel that trigger more. And you want to make sure the sights work for you, that you can see them well, that they're good sights for defensive use, that they're not target shooting sights or, what I call just speed attachments. They aren't even really sights. When you start putting things on your gun that are just designed to help you see them quickly, even though they don't actually help you be more precise, you'll find out really fast when you try to take a headshot at 20 feet, shooting a 3-inch circle at 20 feet, same as we're not aiming at the whole torso, we're aiming at this part of the torso. We put a 3-inch circle or a 3-inch triangle out at 15 feet, 12 feet, 20 feet. Try to hit that. If you aren't able to hit that because of trigger press, again, that could be the trigger, it could be you. If you aren't able to hit that because the sights obscure that entire target area, either find a different kind of gun or get that model gun that works really well for you with a different type of sight. So those are really the 2 most important fundamental skills. Once you know you can manipulate all the buttons and levers and the gun fits your hand, 3 to 5 shots at the high center chest and single shots consistently placed inside of a 3-inch circle. If you can do those, now you're ready to go get some more training, work on presentation from the holster, work on your reloads, your malfunctions, extend the distance, all those kinds of things.
Awesome. Time's flying. We're already at the middle of this episode. For those of you tuning in live, this is PDN Live. The topic tonight is live fire practice, brought to you by Springfield Armory. We're talking everything about targets, drills, realism, or anything else you're wondering related to practicing or improving your defensive shooting skills at the range. If you like what you're hearing, you should sign up for our newsletter. It's free. It's awesome. There should be a link below for you to sign up. And you should connect with us online as well. We're on Facebook, Personal Defense Network, Instagram, PD Network, and Twitter on P_D_N. So keep those live questions coming in. We've got some good ones. This one's actually pretty interesting, Rob. This is someone who is an IPSC shooter, competitive shooter. So they want to know how they can go from a competitive shooter to that defensive shooter, and how do they practice that, and how do they make that, how should they prioritize their training?
All right. Before we go there, while we were doing commercials there at the bottom of the hour, let me also throw out that we do have the distance education courses at personaldefensenetwork.com. There's one on choosing a defensive handgun that addresses, obviously, in much more detail some of the stuff we talked about in the first half hour. And there's also a defensive shooting fundamentals that will help somebody who really is brand new to this, who's looking for the baseline, like not a fancy drill for one specific thing, but just what should I be good at? Where do I start? The defensive shooting fundamentals and then choosing a defensive handgun are two great classes to start out with. And they take, a couple evenings in a week or one day on the weekend. You probably get through that whole course. It's like you're going to a lecture course, but it's video and downloads and things like that. And I think they're about $30–35 each. So going back to the competition evolving into defensive shooting. First of all, if you haven't seen the Worlds Collide videos that I've been doing with Rob Latham, like, go check them out, because we talk about a lot of the differences and similarities, the overlap between defensive firearms practice and competition and training to get a better score. So, and we have a lot of fun with those. There's a whole season of them from last year. We released, I think, 3 already this year. There'll be a new one that comes out tomorrow. So check out the Worlds Collide video either at springfieldarmory.com or at Personal Defense Network. And you'll get some of the answers, and maybe some of the language that Rob uses coming from that competitive background will resonate better. If you're coming from the gun games and you want to take defensive training seriously, the first thing that you need to try to do is create variability, create some chaos in your practice and in your training, because what you're really trying to do in defensive shooting is apply your shooting skills in an unpredictable moment, as opposed to competitive shooting where you're performing your shooting skills in a very predictable way, where you get a stage briefing and here's this target and here's this target, here's this target, this one you shoot twice and that twice or whatever. Like, exactly what you're gonna have to do. And as we cover in this year's Worlds Collide, Latham set up a stage and he said, okay, just do what you do. So I ran through the stage and shot the targets, and he went through how a score would be developed, and my score was like horrible times -7, like it was bad. And then he said, okay, but now think about this, and he just gave me a couple little pointers. Since you know what's coming, think about where you're going to put your feet, where you're going to shoot from, and where you're going to stop, and when you're going to reload, and sort of choreograph the whole thing out. And my score compared to his still sucked, but I like doubled my performance just with one rep, because I knew what was coming and I was able to tailor my response. So that's really what you want to break down, because you get rewarded in the gun games for tailoring your response to the problem. In the real world, you don't know what the problem is going to be. So you have to break that down. And that's really hard for a lot of people, because they see things like, well, why aren't you just swinging over and shooting that target? Well, in the real world, I don't know that target's there. So I have to take some time to assess, right? And yet what I'm really training myself to do is, I shot that guy, I need to break my focus on that non-threat and learn to look around. And then when I see another threat, sure, I'm going to engage it. Well, I can't put a timer on that, right? Or someone's going to say, well, you shot that guy 5 times and you shot that guy 3 times. Well, it was arbitrary. Like, I visualized that threat stopping, right? If I don't have a reactive target, I can't always shoot 3 times and just hope that's enough. Or obviously hope that I didn't fire once and he dropped his knife and turned to run away. Then somebody has me on video at 30 yards, shooting him the second and third time when I would have had plenty of time during recoil management and reacquiring my sight alignment sight picture to process that he was no longer a threat. I didn't need to shoot, but I just habitually was firing 3 rounds. So creating variation and creating chaos and forcing yourself to collect and process information, those are the most important parts of realistic defensive firearms training, so that you're learning to apply skills while you're processing what's going on, not just going through a rote series of actions based on the storyline that you knew was coming.
Yeah, for those of you who didn't watch that PDN live of Rob and Rob When Worlds Collide, that's a really good one to go back to. I know that was one of our most popular PDN live shows. And then I know the When Worlds Collide series now is becoming hugely popular. So it's really cool to see training and competition collide, literally. So side note, if you haven't seen it before, go back on our YouTube channel and take a look at it. So we've got a couple of more granular technique questions for you here, Rob. So as you pull the trigger straight back and are looking at your front sight on the target, where are you exactly seeing them, and how do you follow through with that shot?
In a situation where you need your sights, I think it's really important to think about, like, first of all, start off with what are you looking at, right? We all have seen, I'm sure, the image of the in-focus front sight, slightly blurry rear sight, and the blurry target as good sight picture. Well, sight picture comes after sight alignment. The alignment is a relationship between the front sight and the rear sight. And assuming we're talking about notch and blade, that's what I think people should use, a wide rear notch with a front sight that is bright enough and wide enough to catch your eye. So depending on your vision, you might get away with a very narrow front sight, be capable of a little bit more precision, or you may need a larger front sight to start to fill that rear gap. For the people that want to get really granular, I recommend a 0.18 size gap at the rear notch and a 0.125 or a 0.14 with front sight. And because that gap at the rear is a square, I recommend that your front sight be painted in as a square also. Instead of trying to put a round peg in a square hole, the dot with a circle, you put a square up front. And that now you're starting to get towards sight alignment using angles and using corners. So that's really, in the absence of any other reference, the top corners of the front sight need to match up with the inside top corners of the rear sight wings, with them being equal across the top with equal amounts of light on either side. And I've actually, at my YouTube, at the ICE Training Company YouTube, Rob Pincus, you can go to YouTube and find it either way, there's about 40 minutes on intuitive sighted fire and all kinds of issues like eye dominance and sight design and why you close an eye versus have both eyes open when you're using your sights. So if you really want to get into this, you can go watch those videos. And I'm sure we've covered that in detail, at some level of detail at PDN as well, but I know those are the most thorough discussions we have online about this. So once you have your sight alignment, those top corners of the rear sight and the front sight aligned, now you're going to superimpose that over your target. And sure, your target's going to be blurry because you're hard focused on that front sight with one eye open, one eye closed, and your eyes can only focus at one plane. So you focus on the front sight, but you had to have both eyes open in the first place to get confirmation that you were bringing the gun to the right place. And then at some point you close your eye and you get that sight picture. So now you've got sight alignment, sight picture. And what you want to do is just maintain a good enough sight picture with the front and rear sights aligned as you can over the target, maintaining some coverage of that front sight over what you intend to hit until the gun goes bang. And that's hard for a lot of people because we're so used to training. Kind of goes back to that first question about charging targets. We're so used to the target being static on the range that a lot of people want to make the gun static. And that leads to this push and pull, isometric tension kind of stuff. The reality is the target's very rarely going to be perfectly still, right? And we probably, even just through our breath rate, we aren't going to be completely still. And then you add in the idea that we're pressing that trigger and there's going to be some level of movement of the gun. So everything's going to be in motion. So sight picture, you got to get away from it being perfect. The idea that everything is going to get perfectly still, perfectly aligned, and that's when the shot's going to go off. And a lot of people screw themselves up on the range by staging their trigger. They'll pull the trigger partially. They'll try to control their breathing, try to get everything just perfect, and then snap that last millimeter of trigger travel. And that's usually what screws up their shot. So Rather than that, just press straight through that break, press smoothly all the way, and maintain some semblance of sight picture throughout that press. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was in Utah, and the Utah Marksmanship Precision Awesome Bullseye Shooting League, I forget their name, but we were in, we were up at the PMAA range near Park City, outside of Salt Lake City, and I was finishing up my class, and the range had been double booked. So the NRA Bullseye guys showed up, and gallery something or other. I'd never done it before. I'd seen it, where they kind of, hold the 22 pistol out to their side and do all that stuff, 25 yards. They were getting their stuff set up as we were finishing. And some of the guys, you could tell they were kind of like, we were supposed to be on this range, and we were running our class like normal. So I went over to them and said, hey, we're about to do a trigger control drill. You guys are all about trigger control. If you want to jump in, load up a magazine and join us on the line. So 3 or 4 of them came out, and they went through the process. We did our dynamic deviation control drill, for those who are familiar with our drills inside of the CFS program. And, whatever, okay, cool, thanks. And then kind of placated them for a minute. We finished up our class, another half hour, 45 minutes. And then I stayed afterwards. So most of the students left, but I stayed and I actually participated in a couple rounds, got to shoot some cool guns and have some fun with those guys doing some shooting that I don't normally do. But one of them commented, when you describe, they coach at the local college, and they said the way that we in our program, the way I described trigger press is exactly how they teach it in bullseye shooting. The idea that the gun's never going to be completely still. You start your press, you maintain your sight picture, and you just press straight through, trying to either time that sight alignment, sight picture, which they do in their game, or just accept that it's never going to be perfect and hold it as smoothly as you can, that kind of thing. And that was good to hear. These guys are collegiate coaches. They're sending people to Olympic teams and competing all over the country at the NCAA level with this high level precision shooting. And they're teaching trigger press the same way we are. And that's sort of like what people will see in this Worlds Collide. Latham's the most decorated pistol shooter in the history of pistol shooting, certainly the most accomplished professional shooter of our generation. And he's teaching basically the same stuff that we're teaching in CFS in a very different context, with different vernacular, and it's nice to see how much overlap there is. Sometimes we do collide about snakes and stuff like that, but usually the shooting stuff pretty well overlaps. So as far as sight alignment, sight picture, it's never going to be perfect. Get good sight alignment. You can get that pretty well solid. Good enough sight picture while you're pressing the trigger smoothly until the gun goes off. So
what snacks do you disagree on? Just out of curiosity.
Energy drinks, he doesn't do that. And but then I eat like vegetables and he doesn't do that. So,
All right, so we got another live one in. Rob, I've seen you say online that there are times when pointing a gun over berm in training is justified. When would that be?
Oh boy, yeah. So this is actually something that he and I talked about in a live Latham and I talked about in a live event. In a lot of competition shooting and some of the sort of misplaced gun handling from some military environments, you see groups, pockets of schools, I guess, that habitually point the gun up over the berm. They call it a workspace reload or a high muzzle ready. And most of the time it's not faster. It's certainly not more efficient. It's predicated on flawed understanding of physics or anatomy or neurophysiology or the way the visual system works or something, where people think they're gaining some benefit by seeing the gun in their peripheral vision while they're focused on the target, or focusing on the gun and seeing the target in their peripheral vision, neither of which would be beneficial, even if this were a faster way to reload, but it's really not. And then you lose consistency if you point the gun up versus bringing the gun back down to a ready position and doing your reload down here in your extension back to your shot, right? Because you're from the ready, you're coming up to your eye, from the holster, you're coming up to your eye. But now when you finish your reload, you're going to come down, or a malfunction or whatever it is you're doing. And that inconsistency obviously undermines the repetition that you want for good automated skill performance while you're, like we talked about earlier, while you're processing all that chaos in the real world and you're just getting your shooting done. So fundamentally, there's a flaw with the idea that any of those workspace things or the muzzle up things really help. Then you add in what I consider recklessness of pointing a gun as it's about to be loaded or when it's loaded off the range. And that's where I come down on, there's just no reason to endanger. Every year I travel the earth really, but especially across the country. And there's one or two ranges that are either being sued, were shut down, or getting shut down, or being threatened to be shut down, or having to install baffles or something to keep rounds on the range because they've had shooters with high muzzles launch rounds off the range and land on highways or in houses or tractors or whatever. So there's really, across the community of shooters, I don't understand why people aren't more vociferous about this idea of keeping the muzzle low. That being said, there are times when, in order to train realistically, right? And I'm not saying, like, oh, what if you have to rescue a bunch of orphans and you break into the orphanage and there's a bunch of toddlers around, you just want to point the gun at their heads. Okay, but there are times when, for example, laying on your back. When you're laying on your back, there's no place else to point the gun that makes any sense other than straight up in the air. So if I'm lying on my back, I need to be ready to shoot past my head or past my feet or off to the side. And I'm assessing in 360 degrees. And the best place to have the gun is, in front of my chest, the high center, the high compressed ready in front of the center of my chest. But if I lie on my back, that gun's pointed up. Well, in our programs, we don't do that until the third or fourth day of formal training, right? We're going to do that in an advanced pistol handling class after someone already has developed the discipline with their trigger finger, with following commands, with muzzle awareness, all that kind of stuff. And we could be wrong, but my opinion is, and hopefully the opinion of all the instructors who are running that type of a program, is that by then, the very, very, very low risk that a round is going to go off when it's not supposed to, and the very, very low risk that even if a round did get launched when it wasn't supposed to, off the range, that it was going to hurt somebody, is justified by the benefit of being able to train realistically. Because ultimately, if you're not training realistically, kind of goes back to what I said before, don't bother training. If you're going to come up with some weird convoluted way to point the gun into the berm while you're lying on your back, then just don't even bother practicing from your back. Just say it's not worth it. It's not worth doing realistically, and do it with a dry gun, right? And at least do it in the right position. Don't do it with a live gun. If you can justify that balance of risk and benefit to do it with a live gun, so that you can transition from lying on your back, muzzle up, looking at the target, driving the gun out, and getting those shots, and learning how to manage recoil and all those kinds of things in a safe enough way, then you're justifying that added risk. I just think it's important that we keep in mind that it's not just risk to us, it's really risk to human beings that haven't signed the waiver, right? And obviously, even if you don't hurt anybody, if the round goes through somebody's roof or their living room window, you affect the entire shooting community, right? You may get that range shut down. You may get the article that gets written that gets a local congressman all up in arms about gun control or public ranges or who knows what. So keep that in mind when you're pointing that gun over the berm. Yes, there are times, but the benefit has to significantly outweigh the risk, and it shouldn't be a default under any circumstance.
So that's talking about outdoor ranges. Let's kind of transition a little bit to indoor ranges and ricochet and dealing with that, as well as gun handling in indoor ranges.
Sure, same thing. Those ranges are not designed to have rounds fired straight up, right? Like if you look at, maybe in the stalls, some ranges will accommodate for that, but usually the baffle systems are angled baffles that are designed, if a round goes high out of the shooting stall, it's going to get deflected back down into the floor in the trap. But if you walk forward of the stalls where most of the training is done on indoor ranges and you look up, you'll see big gaps where you've got to have the sprinkler systems, you've got to have the lights, you've got to have all kinds of things, and the brackets, the bolts that hold those steel baffles up, all of those things will potentially direct rounds right back down onto students, or pieces of rounds, fragments of rounds back down onto students if rounds are fired straight up. So on an indoor range, obviously it's much less likely you're presenting a danger to anyone in the environment. Although if it's just a standard roof and you shoot between those baffles and you don't hit an I-beam, rounds could leave the indoor range, and we've certainly seen that happen. You're also now increasing the risk. There's always risk when you're on a range anywhere, but you're increasing the risk to the people in that environment when you start pointing that gun other than the floor or any bullet trap area, whether that's downrange. Sometimes the sidewalls are also bullet traps with the rubber tiles, things like that. When you point the gun up at those lights, at the sprinklers, at the pipes, at the bolts, at the baffles, you're not necessarily pointing in a safe direction at all.
So we're starting to get to the top of the hour. What are your three favorite go-to drills that people can take with them after they watch this PDN live tonight?
The balance of speed and precision drill. And obviously any of this stuff, you can go to the search engine and just look internet wide, and you're going to find demonstrations, videos, whatever. But the balance of speed and precision drill, any drill that falls into that category of balance of speed and precision drills, where you're transitioning between different target levels, levels of precision on different targets. So that might be chest targets and head targets. It might be some targets that are 10 feet away and some targets that are 20 feet away, where you have to take in a command, process that command, figure out what target that command represents, and then respond appropriately with the physical skills, whether it's sighted fire, unsighted fire, whatever it may be. Integrating your movement, integrating your slide lock reloads, maybe some from the ready, some from the holster. Maybe if you're working on presentation while seated that day, well, then you're sitting in a chair and someone's giving you your commands. You can record a playlist, you know, on your smartphone and put earbuds in, put it on random shuffle play, whatever, under earmuffs, and get your commands that way. If you want to do it on your own, we used to have an app. We're working on bringing that app back for the smartphones. But right now, recording your own commands or working with a training partner, the balance of speed and precision drill, I believe, should be the core of everybody's defensive shooting fundamentals. We do have what's called a defensive shooting standards drill. So for years, people kind of said, well, what's one drill that you would use as an evaluation to test people's ability? And there's two versions of the defensive shooting standards drill available at personaldefensenetwork.com. One is a free video available to anybody to see. One is a premium video that kind of just goes a little bit deeper into the concept. And the whole idea there is you've got multiple targets out in front of you, and you've got the range divided into multiple sections. And by working with a training partner who calls out a certain number or gives you a certain command while you're walking back and forth between those three sections on the range, you're able to follow the rules, because all drills have to have rules, right? You're able to follow the rules of the drill to mix up body shots, head shots, shooting at different distances, and forcing movement. So it forces movement on presentation, and it forces movement during reloads. So it's a nice drill. It's not a standards drill in the sense that you can time it or that you can compare your score from one run to another, because there's always variables, but it is one that absolutely lets you evaluate your skill application, your ability to perform the skills truly on demand when you're processing information. So balance of speed and precision drill, defensive shooting standards drill. We also do drills called flow drills. And flow drills are for a more advanced student, but they are absolutely like go-to drills. They're, in the last couple of months, I probably jumped into flow drills with other instructors running classes more than I have any other type of drill. I just did it in Nevada with Ken Crawford running through some drills for a advanced pistol handling class, where I jumped on the line and went through some flow drills. Alessandro Padavane was running some flow drills in Colorado back during the winter. I jumped in with him. And along the way, I've jumped in a few others, because these flow drills force you to shoot in a variety of different positions, right? So once you've developed your fundamental shooting skill while standing, you know, driving out, and maybe while seated, driving out, now the idea is, let me go from standing to seated and back to standing. And I'm going to flow between those two positions and randomize the commands, either, again, from an app or from a training partner or some other outside stimulus. And then as you add other positions, you may go from standing to kneeling, to seated on the ground, to your back, to seated, to your stomach, back to kneeling, back to standing, over to your side, where you just start changing all the different positions you can imagine. You do it from the ready position, and then as your skill develops and you practice presentation from the holster in a variety of different positions, you can do flow drills from the holster as well, right? And now you have an added level of processing that has to happen, because not only are you worried about getting the gun out efficiently to hit the target, you're worried about getting it out safely, not covering yourself. And you're worried about, in a training environment, you're worried about your responsibility to make sure that you're not covering other people or pointing the gun at range and all those things. So you really have to worry about positioning your body and fighting after your startle reaction to getting your gun clear from the holster, oriented towards the threat, and driving it out to get those hits in a safe and efficient way. So the standards drill, balance of speed and precision is the core, and then flow drills as a really nice advanced way to practice application as well.
And can you see samples of all these online, or examples of them?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can go right to Personal Defense Network. And for people that are looking for more variety, if they're looking for more specific drills for skill development, not just the practice, we have there's probably 5 different DVDs which you can get downloading, streaming PDN. Most of them you can buy at Personal Defense Network. Some of them are only available at ICE store, the ICE Training Company online store. with skill development drills and advanced skill development drills for pistols and rifles. So there's I don't know, I think it's like skill development drills, advanced skill development drills, more skill development drills, and then there's a couple for rifle also. So in any of the, essentially you can take all the ones from the pistol and do those with the rifle as well. They just really are designed more around the pistol system. So I would definitely look at those DVDs for people that want, they're the kind of people that like, you know, I want to do these 5 drills and I want to do 5 different drills next week, and they want that kind of variety. Especially for individual skill development, learning new things and practicing new things, those DVDs are great places to start.
So we talked about your 3 favorite drills. What is one drill that you've seen that is completely ineffective, inefficient, and that students should stop doing?
Well, I mean, I have to pick on Irrelevante. I think the El Presidente drill, which we've been calling Irrelevante for, I don't know, 15 years. It's you know, it's a drill where you shoot a target twice, another target twice, another target twice. You reload for no reason, no stim other than the drill says so. You reload, and then you shoot each target twice again, and you run a timer on it. It's a drill that has no real contextual basis and teaches you to do things like fix your number of shots, teaches you to swing and shoot without any processing of the next target. It teaches you to reload without the stimulus of slide lock. And you can make up rationales for why it's a good idea or why it's not horrible, but it's pretty horrible. And it's just been around forever, and it doesn't really matter where it came from or the anecdote that it's based on, but the fact that it would still be used today in anything other than just guys trying to see who's going to buy beer after the training session doesn't make any sense. The fast drill is probably the latest, greatest whiz-bang one that is really popular with a lot of people, and they spend a lot of time on it trying to get their time below the standard, which is just an arbitrary standard made up number of, you know, how fast can you do this drill. It's unlike the El Presidente. I think it's a higher skill level drill. So in isolation, it drives you to be a better shooter. But again, it's not a contextually appropriate drill for defensive training. It's just, you know, a drill to do for bragging rights and to try to earn a coin or a high five or whatever. So, I think that almost any of those drills where there's no variation, it's all choreography, it's all memorized, and especially when you're trying to beat a time and you get down to where you're worried about hundredths of a second in a drill, you're almost certainly chasing the wrong metrics and spending a lot of time potentially on things that are distracting you from things that are important.
Sage advice tonight. Well, we're at the top of the hour. For those of you that still have some questions that we weren't able to get around to, Rob, will you be checking questions on YouTube throughout the week?
Yeah, I'll get later tonight, maybe tomorrow. I'll be kind of out in the remote boonies of Western Oregon for the next couple of days, but lots more downtime than I've had over the last several months coming up soon. So yeah, I'll get to those questions and put the responses online.
Okay, awesome. And if people want to connect with you after the show, how do they do that?
Best place is social media. You know, you can always go to the Facebook or Instagram, Twitter. If you can use those things, you'll be able to find me using my name. And then obviously the comments section at YouTube and at personaldefensenetwork.com. And not just under this live broadcast that's going to obviously be available in a recorded version, but in any of the individual articles or any of the individual videos, you can always post comments there as well, whether it's a question or just, you know, here's what I liked about this, or I used this drill at the range, or here I have another problem that this doesn't solve, but it's close. Can you help me, or reference another video? Or maybe it's the comment that'll inspire the next video, right? We're doing a lot of videotaping and a lot of article writing over the next few months now that it's not tour season. And the more comments and requests people make through social media or through the comments at personaldefensenetwork.com, then the more targeted the information will be. Instead of things that where other students had questions about or that I wanted to talk about, or maybe some of our product sponsors and our alliances through the tour want us to talk about, what do you want us to talk about, right? What are your questions as PDN members or people who just visit the website frequently? I'm really interested in answering your questions. So make those comments and send in those requests.
Wow, did you hear that, everybody? You get to control the content for Personal Defense Network. So if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter. It's free. There's a link to it. Also connect with us online too. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're everywhere, YouTube. But thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Rob, so much. And this was PDN Live Fire Practice, brought to you by Springfield Armory. Have a good night, and we'll see you all later.